Ethan Calloway had long forgotten what silence truly felt like. Not the kind of silence that came from an empty room or a late evening without conversation, but the kind that seeped into your bones when laughter, warmth, and presence left your life and never returned. 2 years had passed since his wife, Amelia, died in a car accident on a rainy night that still haunted his dreams. They had been married for 11 years, and every one of those years clung to him like a memory he couldn't decide whether to cherish or run from. He was the CEO of Calloway Enterprises, a company he had practically built with his wife by his side. But after her death, he delegated most responsibilities to his board and buried himself in work when he wasn't hiding behind the walls of his penthouse. He attended galas, signed papers, made appearances, and pretended the world was still in motion. But inside, he felt stuck in a moment he couldn't escape. On a soft spring morning, he found himself wandering into a small cafe he had never visited before. It was tucked between a flower shop and a bookstore on a quieter street, a place where people spoke softly and lingered over coffee. He didn't even know why he stopped there. Perhaps the scent of fresh pastries from the open door touched a part of him he'd been ignoring. The cafe was warm and airy, filled with pastel colors and wooden accents, the kind of space his wife would have loved. He sat at a corner table by the window, watching people pass outside, when a voice gently stirred him from his thoughts. "Good morning," she said softly. "What can I get for you?" He looked up, his breath catching for a moment. The waitress stood there with a small notepad and the gentlest brown eyes he had seen in a long time. Her features were not the same as Amelia's, her hair was darker, her frame slighter, but something in the way she carried herself, the warmth in her voice, the quiet kindness, tugged at a memory buried deep within him. "I'm sorry," he said, realizing he'd been silent too long. "Just a coffee, black, and, maybe a croissant if you have one." "We do," she smiled. "I'll bring it right over." He watched her leave, unsettled and unsure why. When she returned with the coffee and pastry, she placed them carefully in front of him and gave a little nod before walking off. There was no awkward chatter, no forced greeting, just a silent understanding that some people needed space. Her name, he learned only when he glanced at the cafe chalkboard near the counter listing the staff, Lily. He found himself returning the next morning. And the next, Lily wasn't overly cheerful like many service workers tried to be. She was calm, attentive, and spoke only when it felt natural. She had a way of asking, "How are you today?" That didn't sound like a formality. Some days he answered, some days he didn't. On both occasions, she accepted the reply with the same gentle grace. He learned small things about her from observation before he ever asked. She wore a necklace with a tiny silver leaf pendant. Her hands were slightly calloused, perhaps from art or gardening. When she thought no one was watching, she hummed under her breath while wiping tables or arranging cups. She worked afternoons most days and occasionally evenings, and she always tied her hair in a low knot that loosened by the end of her shift. About 3 weeks in, a late afternoon rainstorm swept the city. Ethan was sitting in his usual corner with a stack of documents he wasn't really reading. The cafe had emptied due to the weather. Lily came by with a fresh pot of coffee and offered to refill his cup. "You don't usually stay this long," she said softly. "I didn't realize," he replied, glancing at the time. "The rain makes it hard to notice," she smiled. "It slows the world down." He looked at her, surprised by how accurately she described the feeling in his chest. "I suppose it does." She hesitated before speaking again. "I can bring you something warm to eat if you're staying until it clears." He thought of declining but found himself nodding. "Soup, maybe. We have a creamy tomato today," she said. "I'll bring that." As she walked away, he stared after her, wondering why every moment with her felt like something gently waking up inside him. It wasn't romantic, at least not in his understanding of it. It was more like breathing fresh air after being in a room too long. When she set the bowl down, she lingered a second. "You look tired," she said, not with judgment or sympathy, but with quiet concern. He exhaled. "I suppose I am. You don't need to talk about it," she said, as if scanning his thoughts. "I'm just saying it's okay to rest once in a while." He almost laughed. "I've forgotten how." She gave a small nod, as if that answer didn't surprise her. "People do." She walked off and didn't return until he'd finished. She picked up the bowl and looked at him as if gauging whether to leave him alone or not. He found himself saying, "You remind me of someone." She paused, her expression curious but measured. "Someone important?" He nodded. "Someone I loved." She didn't ask further. She simply held his gaze for a moment and said, "Sometimes familiar souls cross paths more than once in life. Maybe not in the same way, but in the ways we need." That night, he lay in bed and thought of her words more than he had thought of anything in months. Days turned into weeks, and though he never shared much about himself, Lily's presence became a quiet anchor. She never treated him differently, even though by then she surely knew who he was. Occasionally, customers reacted when they recognized him, whispering his name or glancing at their phones with articles pulled up. But Lily never seemed impressed or intimidated. She spoke to him the same way she would speak to anyone who came in for a cup of coffee and a moment of calm. One Friday morning, he found her at the counter polishing glasses. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "Almost a year. You like it? It's peaceful," she said. "And I get to meet people. Some are noisy, some are quiet, some don't even know why they're here. But everyone arrives carrying something." He looked at her hands. "You were an artist once." She blinked, a bit surprised. "I still am, just not professionally." He nodded. "You paint, sculpt," she corrected gently. "Clay work mostly, but I stopped selling pieces. I make them for myself now." "What changed?" She hesitated. "A loss. A complicated one. Grief changes what we share with the world." Her words settled in his chest like a whisper. He realized then that she carried something too, not the same as his, but equally defining. One evening, after a strained board meeting and a charity event he couldn't emotionally endure, he found himself wandering back to the cafe at closing time. The lights were dimmed and chairs were being stacked, but Lily was still wiping down tables. She looked up, surprised but not unsettled. "We're closed," she said softly, "but I can make you tea if you need a minute." He stepped inside, rain dripping from his coat. "Tea sounds fine." She guided him to a small table near the back where the lighting was soft and the sounds from outside were hushed by the downpour. She returned with a mug of chamomile and sat across from him, not formally, but because it felt right. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the whole city," she observed. "I don't know how to live any other way." "Maybe you don't have to carry it alone," she said. Even, for a little while, he looked at her, and what surged in his chest wasn't attraction in the common sense, it was trust, or something that resembled the earliest shape of it. Without quite knowing why or how the words formed, he said, "Can you be my date for one day?" Lily blinked, her lips parting in surprise. "What?" He rubbed his forehead, suddenly aware of how unusual it sounded. "There's a charity luncheon next week. It's a partner event, and everyone goes with someone. I usually avoid these things, but this one is for a foundation my wife started before she passed. I don't want to attend alone, and I don't want any of the social expectations that come with asking someone from my circle." She looked at him quietly, trying to understand the intention behind the words. "I'm not asking for anything beyond a presence," he clarified. "It's just one day. I don't know anyone else I could ask without it becoming something it shouldn't be. But with you," he paused, searching. "You make things feel steady." She didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands on the table and watched the steam curl from the mug. "I don't know what being your date means," she said softly. "It means you'd stand next to me, sit at a table, maybe let people assume what they want, but you wouldn't have to pretend anything you're not. And I wouldn't either. And after that day," he said slowly, "you go back to being you, and I go back to being me. You don't owe me anything. I don't expect anything." "Why me?" He swallowed. "Because you remind me of her. Not in how you look. In how you are. And when I'm around you, I don't feel as lost." She looked touched, and for a moment her eyes glistened as if she understood more than he'd said. After a long breath, she nodded once. "All right," she said. One day, he hadn't realized how much he feared her refusal until relief washed through him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she replied gently. "Let me at least find something to wear first." The next few days passed strangely. Ethan felt both nervous and calm when he thought about the event. For the first time, attending something in Amelia's memory didn't feel like digging up a wound. He even told his assistant to send over the event details to Lily so she would know what to expect. On the morning of the luncheon, he arrived at her apartment building to pick her up. It was modest, older, with ivy climbing the brickwork and a small balcony on each floor. When she stepped out into the hallway, he felt his breath catch again, but not from grief this time. She wore a simple soft blue dress that flowed gently at her knees, her hair loosely styled with a few strands framing her face. The leaf pendant rested at her collarbone. "You look," he began, then stopped, unsure if the word right for her was the same word he once used for his wife. She saved him. Presentable, she offered lightly. He smiled, a real one. That's too small a word. They rode in silence for a while until she turned to the window and said, "You don't have to talk if you don't want to." "I know," he said. When they arrived, the venue hummed with polished voices and clinking glasses. It was a sunlit hall adorned with flowers and framed photographs from past charity events. Among them were pictures of Amelia, smiling, speaking, handing out awards. Ethan felt the familiar ache but also a gentle presence beside him. Lily walked slightly behind him at first, unsure of the rhythm of such gatherings. But as people approached, shaking his hand and offering condolences disguised as politeness, she stepped subtly closer, matching his pace, grounding him. A woman in an emerald dress whispered to a friend while eyeing Lily curiously. Another attendee looked between there, clasped arms and nodded in quiet approval. But Lily didn't seem affected by the attention. She carried herself with the same calm as in the cafe. When they sat at their table, she poured him water before her own and leaned slightly toward him. "Are you all right?" she whispered. "It's strange," he admitted. "Being here without her." "You're not here without her," she said quietly. "You're just standing differently in the memory of her." Her words had a way of finding the fracture and placing something gentle there. During the luncheon, he gave a short speech about Amelia's vision for the foundation. His voice trembled at first, but midway through, he looked at Lily. She didn't nod or smile, she simply listened with the kind of presence that steadied him. He finished without breaking. After polite applause, she touched his arm lightly, a gesture so small, yet it anchored him fully in the moment. During a quieter part of the afternoon, he led her to a terrace overlooking a garden. They stood side by side, watching guests mingle below. "You've helped more today than you know," he said. She shook her head softly. "I didn't do anything. You showed up," he replied, "and sometimes that's more than enough." She looked at him for a long moment, and he could tell she understood things he hadn't spoken. As the event wound down, an older man approached them, the chairman of the foundation board. He smiled warmly and said, "It's been a long time since I've seen you smile at one of these events, Ethan." Ethan blinked, unaware he had been smiling at all. The chairman then turned to Lily and extended his hand. "Thank you for being here with him." Lily accepted the handshake modestly. He asked, "I came." The chairman chuckled softly. "We're grateful." When the event ended and they returned to the car, neither spoke for several miles. Eventually, Lily broke the silence. "You did something brave today," she said. "I didn't feel brave. Bravery doesn't always feel like strength," she replied softly. "Sometimes it feels like breathing even when it hurts." They arrived at her building and she began to unbuckle her seatbelt. But before she stepped out, she turned to him. "Ethan," she said, "thank you for trusting me with today." He met her gaze. "Thank you for carrying it with me." She hesitated, her hand on the door. "Take care of yourself," she said gently. "I'll try," he replied. She stepped out and closed the door quietly. He watched her walk into the building, the hem of her dress brushing her calves as she moved with unhurried grace. That night, he sat in his living room where photos of Amelia still adorned the shelves. He didn't feel guilty for the first time about letting another presence ease his pain, even if only briefly. Lily wasn't a replacement, nor a distraction. She was a bridge, one that didn't demand he abandon his grief to cross it. The next morning, he went back to the cafe. It was quieter than usual, with only a few patrons reading newspapers or stirring their cups. Lily was behind the counter arranging pastries in a glass case. When she saw him, she didn't greet him with surprise or delight, just a soft nod that acknowledged everything unspoken. He approached the counter. "Coffee?" she asked. "And a croissant," he said. "The usual." She placed the order and then leaned slightly across the counter. "You're lighter today," she observed. "I feel different," he admitted. She nodded. Different can be the beginning of something. He didn't protest or analyze the statement. He simply took his coffee and sat in his corner, feeling the quiet not as a void but as space where something new might gently grow. Over the following week, their interactions returned to normal, though subtly changed. She didn't ask about the event, and he didn't offer details. Yet something unspoken lingered, an understanding that the day they shared mattered. One afternoon, as he was about to leave, he paused at the counter. "Would you ever show me your sculptures?" She looked surprised, then cautious. "They're not for exhibition anymore." "I don't mean publicly," he clarified. Just, sometime, she considered him before saying, maybe. If the time feels right. He nodded, accepting the answer as enough. They continued in this quiet companionship. He still visited the cafe, and she still served him with the same gentle rhythm. They didn't speak of roles or define what had happened that day, they didn't need to. The steadiness they found in each other didn't demand a label. As spring deepened into summer, the scent of blooming jasmine drifted through the cafe windows. Some days he stayed longer than he meant to. Some evenings she wiped down the tables a little slower when he was still there. They shared glances, brief words, small silences that didn't ache the way silence used to. And for the first time in 2 years, when Ethan woke in the quiet of dawn and looked out over the sleeping city, he didn't feel like he was standing at the edge of something lost. He felt, simply, that he was still here, and that someone gentle in the world had seen him without asking him to be anything else. And that was enough.